The moment my son threw my suitcase onto the front porch, I understood something crystal clear. Being discarded doesn't define your worth. It can ignite the fiercest kind of reinvention. I stood there in my best Sunday dress, watching James and his wife Jessica, my own flesh and blood, close the door on 12 years of my guidance, care, and love. Little did they know that what they treated like yesterday's garbage would soon be worth $8 million. My name is Margaret Williams, but everyone calls me Maggie. At 72, I've learned that the ultimate revenge isn't bitterness. It's building a life so full of success and independence that no one can question your value. And James and Jessica gave me more than enough motivation to do just that. It was October 15th, 2012, when my world imploded. Widowed and 60 years old, I had been living with James and Jessica for 3 months, helping with their 2 young children while trying to figure out my next steps. Life insurance wasn't much, and I believed family was supposed to help each other during hard times. But that morning, the harsh reality hit like a punch to the chest. "Mom, we need to talk," James said, his voice icy and distant. Jessica stood behind him, arms crossed, radiating the smug confidence I'd long grown to resent. "This arrangement isn't working anymore," she announced, her words slicing through the fragile sense of home I'd tried to cling to. "You're too set in your ways. Maggie and the children are confused about who's in charge." I looked at James, waiting for my son to defend me, to remember that I had raised him alone after his father walked out when he was 8. But his eyes avoided mine entirely, and in that instant, the boy I knew had vanished. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, voice smaller than I intended. Jessica shrugged with the casual cruelty of someone tossing out an inconvenience. "That's not our problem anymore. You're a grown woman. Figure it out." 20 minutes later, everything I owned, 60 years of memories, photographs, and keepsakes, was condensed into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. The rest, Jessica decided, would go to Goodwill. James mumbled an awkward, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," as he set my bags on the porch. The taxi arrived just as the first drops of rain began to fall. I climbed in, not because I was strong, but because I was broken. And as the house disappeared behind me, so did any illusion that my family would support me in my time of need. I had $847 in my purse, no job, and nowhere to live. The Sunset Motel on Route 9 became my temporary home for the next 6 weeks, a room that smelled of industrial cleaner and resignation, yet it had a roof and a door that locked. Even that felt luxurious compared to being treated like refuse by the people I loved. Mr. Patterson, the motel's elderly desk clerk, took pity on me early on, sliding an extra towel across the counter and muttering, "You're not like our usual guests." Indeed, I was hiding not from the world, but from the bitter reality that my own son and daughter-in-law had discarded me. The days began slowly, painfully. I'd wake in that narrow bed, forget for a fleeting moment where I was, and then reality would strike with the force of a slap. No children's laughter. No breakfast preparations, just the hum of a dying air conditioner. But I'm not a woman who stays down. Survival had been my constant companion since James was a child. I'd worked 3 jobs, cleaned offices, run errands, and juggled whatever came my way to keep us afloat. Being homeless was just another obstacle, one I knew I could navigate. Each morning I walked to the library. Free internet, air conditioning, and most importantly, access to job listings became my lifeline. At 60, employers weren't exactly tripping over themselves to hire me, but I wasn't looking for charity. I was looking for opportunity. On the 4th interview that week, I met Sarah Mitchell, owner of a local garden center. "You have bookkeeping experience?" she asked. 20 years, I replied, having handled finances for my late husband's contracting business. What I didn't mention was the insight I had gained from decades of noticing inefficiencies within 10 minutes of her cluttered office. I spotted overpayments, outdated pricing, and a disorganized inventory system. The pay was modest, $15 an hour, but that first paycheck felt like winning the lottery. Within 6 weeks, I discovered something remarkable. Sarah was discarding thousands of dollars worth of plants each year. Unsellable, dead, discarded. But I saw potential. Most weren't dead, they were dormant. I convinced her to let me rehabilitate them. My tiny studio apartment above Yepes Pizza became a jungle of pots and planters, each one a project of patience, research, and care. By March, the first batch I restored looked healthier than the day it had arrived. Sarah bought them all, paying me $847 a sum, equivalent to a month's salary at the garden center. More importantly, I'd found purpose again. From there, the transformation began. By year 2, I was earning more from plant rehabilitation than my bookkeeping job. Word spread other garden centers called, and by year 3, the business was bursting at the seams. With guidance from Eleanor Rodriguez at the Small Business Development Center, I realized I wasn't just saving plants, I was solving a major industry problem, turning waste into profit. What if I franchise the process? Teach others, license the method, and scale nationwide. I took the plunge despite fear and began building Phoenix Plant Recovery, a business rooted in the principle that nothing and no one is truly worthless if you know how to see potential. With the SBA loan approved for $150,000, I leased a 5,000-square-foot warehouse on the outskirts of Millbrook. I hired 2 part-time employees and established contracts with 15 garden centers across 3 states. Phoenix Plant Recovery, because everything deserves a second chance, was officially born. The woman who had been discarded, treated like trash, was now building a business empire. James and Jessica's assumption that I would wither and disappear had been spectacularly wrong. Every healthy plant I restored, every contract signed, every step toward growth was proof that they had misjudged me. I was no longer dependent, no longer at the mercy of others' opinions. I was a force of my own making. By year 5, Phoenix Plant Recovery had expanded into 12 states with 47 licensed operators. I had signed a consulting contract with Home Depot's regional headquarters, traveling to Atlanta for corporate meetings. Once I had been living in a cramped motel room with less than $1,000 to my name. Now I was treated like an expert, respected, and sought after. The journey hadn't been easy. There were 18-hour days, failed experiments, moments when doubt crept in and whispered that I was in over my head. But each challenge was a lesson, a reminder that resilience, creativity, and perseverance can turn even the darkest moments into stepping stones towards something remarkable. Beyond business, my personal life had stabilized. I had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Millbrook's historic district, complete with a garden where I could experiment with new rehabilitation techniques. I had friends, real friends, not people who tolerated me out of obligation. My weekly book club with Eleanor and 3 other women became the highlight of my social calendar. The financial success was staggering even to me. Phoenix Plant Recovery was generating over $2 million in annual revenue, and my personal net worth had crossed the 7-figure mark. I kept meticulous spreadsheets, not out of obsession, but as a testament to my independence and self-reliance. Then came the day I decided it was time to find a home that matched my new life. Apartment living had served its purpose, but with my growing business ventures and investments, I needed space, a statement of who I had become. Jennifer Walsh. My realtor showed me the Harrison Estate, a 12,000-square-foot colonial perched on 8 acres in Millbrook Heights, the neighborhood James and Jessica had always dreamed of living in but could never afford. The asking price was $4,200,000. I didn't hesitate. Cash offer $3,800,000, close in 2 weeks. The sellers accepted within 6 hours. Just like that, I owned the most prestigious home in town, overlooking the very neighborhood where my former son and daughter-in-law had lived comfortably while throwing me out. The next morning, I was arranging my new life in the grand foyer when the doorbell rang at exactly 9:17 a.m. On the security monitor, I saw them, James, Jessica, and the 2 teenagers I barely recognized, standing like door-to-door salespeople. Their timing, perfectly predictable, almost made me laugh. James looked older, gray at the temples, anxious, trying too hard in khaki pants and a polo shirt. Jessica, in designer jeans and a blazer, smiled with calculated charm. Behind them, Emma and Tony, my grandchildren, looked curious but wary. I approached the door slowly, letting 6 years of silence and absence fill the space between us. "Well, well," I said, my voice measured. James attempted to explain they had read about my house in the newspaper, that they wanted to congratulate me. Jessica added that they wanted to reconnect, to rebuild family ties, but I saw through it. Family had nothing to do with their visit. This was opportunism, financial desperation, and perhaps envy. I let them inside anyway, leading them through the foyer, past the crystal chandelier and marble staircase, into the living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking my expansive grounds. I watched their faces as they absorbed the silk wallpaper, Persian rugs, and artwork worth more than most people's cars. Tony whispered about the pool. Emma gawked at the space, both oblivious to the tension thickening the air. I didn't mince words. I told the children the truth about what had happened 6 years earlier, how I had been invited into their home, contributed my Social Security, cared for them, and yet after 3 months was abruptly forced out with nothing but 2 suitcases. I described the motel, the studio apartment above Yepes Pizza, the long hours at the garden center, and how every challenge had been a stepping stone to rebuilding my life. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Tony looked stunned. They had been lied to, kept in the dark, robbed of the chance to have a grandmother who loved them. I explained that while I wanted a relationship with them, James and Jessica would have to earn their way back into my life. They had chosen convenience over compassion, and their actions had consequences. James and Jessica attempted to argue, claiming families should stick together, accusing me of playing games or punishing them for the past. I didn't flinch. I reminded them that I wasn't the same woman they had discarded. I was independent, successful, respected. My mansion, my business, my life, they were the proof. Emma and Tony, innocent. In all of this, wanted to listen, to understand, to reconnect. And for them, I would open my heart. For the adults, the lesson was clear. Respect and integrity are earned, not assumed. As they left, I walked with Emma and Tony through my home, sharing stories and photographs, answering their questions, and creating a bridge across the 6 lost years. The silence that followed their departure wasn't empty. It was filled with satisfaction, justice, and the quiet knowledge that the woman who had been thrown away had not only survived, but flourished, proving that value isn't dictated by others' opinions, but by the strength, vision, and perseverance within oneself. In the days that followed, I settled into a rhythm with Emma and Tony, discovering the joy of grandmothering I had been denied for 6 years. Weekends were spent baking cookies, exploring the gardens, and reading stories under the shade of the sprawling oaks on my property. Their laughter filled rooms that had once been silent, and I savored each moment. Every cookie I baked, every story I shared, was a small act of reclaiming the years stolen from us. The children were innocent victims in this saga, and I wanted them to know love and stability, 2 things I had fought hard to restore in my own life. Meanwhile, Phoenix Plant Recovery continued to expand. My warehouse was humming with activity. Employees nurtured plants with the same dedication I had instilled. I introduced an internal training program to certify operators, ensuring that our methods of rehabilitation were consistent across all locations. The business had grown so fast that I had to hire a full-time operations manager, a role I entrusted to someone I trusted completely. Eleanor stayed close, advising on scaling strategies and helping me navigate complex licensing agreements. Each step was a reminder that I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. One afternoon, while reviewing expansion proposals in my new home office, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Curious, I answered, and a voice from a regional chain of garden centers spoke quickly and excitedly. They wanted to partner with Phoenix Plant Recovery. They had seen my work and realized the potential in reducing waste while turning unsellable stock into profit. Within weeks, I had secured contracts that nearly doubled my revenue. The satisfaction wasn't only in the money, it was in proving that what others discarded as useless could be transformed into something valuable. Every plant restored was a tangible reminder of my journey from desperation to success. The financial victories, though exhilarating, were secondary to the emotional ones. James and Jessica, who had once controlled my life and dictated my worth, had no access to my business or my life beyond the children. Their sense of entitlement had been replaced by the stark reality of my independence. They were no longer the gatekeepers. I was. When James texted to apologize again, I didn't respond immediately. I wanted him to understand that apologies were meaningless without action. For Jessica, her attempts to reconnect were met with polite but firm boundaries. It was not cruelty, it was justice tempered with compassion for the innocent children caught in the middle. One evening, Emma and Tony helped me in the greenhouse carefully repotting plants that were nearing the end of their dormancy cycle. Tony looked up at me, curiosity sparkling in his eyes, and asked, "Grandma Maggie, were you scared when everything went wrong?" I paused, letting the question settle. Terrified, I admitted. But fear is only temporary. What lasts is determination and the ability to see potential where others see failure. Tony nodded solemnly, perhaps understanding something I had only fully realized after decades of struggle. Resilience is born from adversity, and true value is self-determined. That same week, Sarah Mitchell visited from Florida, bringing news that she had sold her garden center and joined Phoenix Plant Recovery as a licensed operator. Seeing her again was a reminder of the early days when I had taken small risks and proven myself step by step. Her words of praise, how I had inspired her and many others in our town, were humbling. I realized then that my story wasn't just about personal triumph. It was about showing others that opportunity often hides in challenges, that the discarded and overlooked can thrive with vision, care, and persistence. Over time, I began documenting the lessons I had learned, not for fame or recognition, but as a roadmap for anyone struggling to find their way after loss or rejection. How to identify overlooked potential, how to scale a small enterprise, and most importantly, how to maintain self-respect and integrity when others attempt to undermine you. Each entry was a reflection of my journey, a testament to what it meant to rise from nothing to success through tenacity and ingenuity. Despite the victories, the hardest lessons were in human relationships. I had forgiven James and Jessica in my heart, but trust had to be rebuilt gradually, if at all. The children, however, deserved to know the truth and to experience the relationship they had been denied. I encouraged Emma and Tony to speak freely, to question, and to form their own understanding. Slowly, boundaries were established, honesty replaced deception, and the fractured pieces of family began to take on a tentative shape of healing. But the adults would need time to prove themselves, not because I was bitter, but because life had taught me the value of earned respect. By the time Phoenix Plant Recovery was operating at full capacity across the eastern states, I had firmly established a life of both comfort and purpose. The Harrison estate wasn't just a mansion. It was a symbol of resilience, a physical manifestation of every lesson learned, every challenge overcome. Every plant in my greenhouse, every square foot of manicured grounds was proof that even when life discards you, growth is possible with care, vision, and determination. It was ironic, almost poetic, that the same hands that had once packed my belongings onto a porch now nurtured life, beauty, and prosperity. One quiet evening, I sat in the conservatory with a cup of tea, reflecting on the long path from Motel Sunset to my estate. The children were asleep upstairs, the greenhouse lamps casting a warm glow, and for the first time in years, I felt fully at peace. Adversity had been my greatest teacher, revealing my strengths, my ingenuity, and my worth. It wasn't revenge that had sustained me. It was the unwavering refusal to accept a life dictated by others' narrow vision. And in that moment, I understood freedom, self-respect, and purpose are the ultimate triumphs. The next morning, I woke early, the sunlight spilling over the sweeping lawns and the greenhouse, and sipped my coffee while planning the weekend. Emma and Tony would be visiting again, and this time I intended to show them the full scope of what I had built. I wanted them to see that setbacks, even devastating ones, could be transformed into opportunity. The world had a way of discarding what it deemed unworthy, but with determination, care, and courage discarded, things could flourish. I smiled at the thought, knowing my life had become a living testament to that truth. By mid-morning, the kids arrived full of questions and energy. We toured the estate from the sprawling back gardens to the kitchen where I planned menus and experimented with new plant-based recipes. Their eyes widened at the marble floors, the luxurious chandeliers, and the endless rows of thriving greenery. Tony lingered in the conservatory, carefully examining each plant, asking questions about soil composition and watering schedules. Emma, meanwhile, was captivated by the library, running her fingers over the floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves and marveling at the books. I realized then that this wasn't just a home. It was a classroom, a sanctuary, and a symbol of resilience, all rolled into one. I wanted them to understand that the value of anything plants, houses, even people, was revealed not by how quickly it was discarded, but by how carefully it was nurtured. While the children explored, I reflected on how far Phoenix Plant Recovery had come. The business had grown into 12 states, employing dozens of people, and was generating millions annually. The licensing model worked beautifully. Other operators trained in our unique methods were restoring plants in their own communities, bringing both profit and sustainability. What started as a simple idea to revive unsellable plants had become a nationwide movement. I had created a system where overlooked potential plants employees and even my own abilities could thrive. The irony wasn't lost on me. Once considered a burden, I had become indispensable not just to my own business, but to an industry that had long underestimated the power of ingenuity and persistence. Later that afternoon, James and Jessica arrived again uninvited, but hoping perhaps for a different reception than last time. They paused at the driveway, hesitating as they took in the scale of the property. I met them at the door, calm but firm. "We need to talk." James started, his voice a mixture of guilt and apprehension. "Maggie, we've reflected on everything. We know we handled things wrong and we want to make amends." Jessica, too, looked tense, but there was a note of hope in her voice. For a brief moment, I considered letting them in, but I reminded myself that reconciliation isn't a right, it's earned. "You want to talk?" I asked, keeping my tone measured. "Good. Then start by showing that you understand what you did and that you've truly changed. Not just for yourselves, but for Emma and Tony. Because until then, you're not invited into this house." Their faces fell, the gravity of my words finally registering. James swallowed hard, realizing that apologies alone could not undo 6 years of lies, deceit, and abandonment. Jessica's usual confidence wavered, and for once she had to confront the reality of her actions. The children watching from the sidelines understood too. They had seen through the pretense long before their parents could admit it to themselves. After they left, I turned back to Emma and Tony, their eyes bright with curiosity and a hunger for learning. "Grandma Maggie," Emma asked, "do you think people can really change?" I smiled gently. "Some can and some can't. But what matters is that you always protect your own integrity. You can offer forgiveness, but never at the expense of your self-respect." Tony nodded, absorbing the lesson in silence. I realized that in many ways guiding these children and helping them see the truth was more meaningful than any business victory. Legacy wasn't only about wealth, it was about values, resilience, and integrity. The days that followed were a mix of business strategy and family building. I trained new employees, expanded our greenhouse operations, and continued documenting my methods and lessons for future generations. Each plant that flourished was a small triumph, a reminder that care, attention, and vision could transform even the most neglected things. And each interaction with Emma and Tony was a step toward rebuilding trust and love, carefully cultivated like the plants I had brought back to life. Months later, I received an unexpected letter from Sarah Mitchell, reflecting on how our early collaboration had inspired her to take bold steps in her own life. Her success achieved through the principles we had developed together reminded me that my journey wasn't just about revenge or proving others wrong. It was about showing that life's setbacks can be turned into opportunities if approached with courage, strategy, and patience. Every challenge I had faced, the eviction, the financial struggles, the betrayal, had been a lesson that led me to a richer, more meaningful existence. And yet the most profound transformation was internal. I was no longer the widow hiding in a motel room, fearful and dependent. I was a business owner, a grandmother, a mentor, and a woman who had reclaimed her power. Every decision I made, every boundary I set, every act of nurturing of plants, business, or family was a testament to the value of self-belief. For the first time in decades, I felt fully in control of my life, my legacy, and my happiness. Over the following months, Emma and Tony became regular visitors, and our bond strengthened with every shared story experiment in the greenhouse or quiet evening reading together. I realized that the true measure of success wasn't just the thriving plants or the 7-figure business, it was the ability to nurture relationships without losing oneself. The children reminded me that family, when handled with honesty and care, could be rebuilt on a foundation of trust rather than fear or obligation. And as they learned about resilience through my experiences, I could see seeds of confidence and empathy taking root within them. James and Jessica, however, remained on the periphery, occasionally attempting to reach out with half-hearted apologies or requests for advice. Each time I reminded myself that boundaries were crucial. Forgiveness does not mean erasing the past or allowing others to exploit your kindness. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. I had invested 6 years in building a life where my worth was no longer dictated by anyone else's perception. If they wished to reconcile, it would require genuine effort, accountability, and transparency, not demands born from convenience or financial strain. Business continued to grow at an astonishing pace. I expanded Phoenix Plant Recovery into 15 states, training new operators, licensing our methods, and consulting for major retailers looking to implement sustainable plant recovery programs. Each new success reinforced the lesson I had learned in that tiny motel room 6 years ago. Opportunities often hide in plain sight, overlooked by those who fail to recognize potential. I became a mentor to other older women, encouraging them to pursue ventures they might have thought impossible. "You're never too late to start again." I would tell them my own story, a living testament to that principle. Despite the demands of running a multi-million-dollar business, I always made time for my grandchildren. Together, we planted new flowers, experimented with innovative hydroponic setups, and cataloged every success and failure in journals that they could one day pass along. Through these moments, I imparted more than knowledge. I passed on a sense of dignity, perseverance, and the importance of self-respect. I saw their confidence blossom as they witnessed firsthand the rewards of patience, effort, and refusing to allow others to define their value. It was on a quiet Saturday morning as I sipped my coffee on the terrace overlooking the estate that I realized how far I had come. I reflected on the eviction that had once seemed like the worst moment of my life. The humiliation, the uncertainty, and the loneliness had all been catalysts driving me to uncover abilities I hadn't realized I possessed. Losing everything had forced me to confront fear, embrace resourcefulness, and finally recognize my own worth. In retrospect, that moment on the porch with 2 suitcases had not been an ending. It had been the first step toward the life I was living now. A few months later, news of my story spread through local media and online platforms. People were inspired by how a 60-year-old widow thrown out by her own family had built a thriving business and reclaimed her dignity. Messages poured in from all over the country, women and men sharing their struggles, asking for guidance, and thanking me for showing them that reinvention was possible at any age. I realized then that my life's work wasn't just about plants or profits. It was about showing others that adversity, no matter how brutal, could be transformed into opportunity. My experiences had taught me that self-belief, perseverance, and strategic action were far more powerful than bitterness or regret. James and Jessica eventually made small gestures to show they were taking responsibility, meeting with a financial advisor, returning to work, and having honest conversations with the children about the past. But I had learned the most valuable lesson of all my approval or forgiveness was not required for them to live their own lives. My peace, my wealth, and my self-respect were mine alone, cultivated through patience, hard work, and a refusal to let others dictate my worth. Emma and Tony thrived secure in the knowledge that love could exist alongside accountability, and that true family was built on truth and mutual respect. On the anniversary of my move into the Harrison estate, I stood on the terrace at sunset, watching the golden light reflect off the gardens I had nurtured from the ground up. I felt a profound sense of closure and achievement. The woman who had once been homeless, ridiculed, and discarded had become someone her former family could neither ignore nor undermine. But more than that, I had reclaimed my life, established my legacy, and proven that setbacks were often the hidden beginnings of extraordinary journeys. Living well in the truest sense had become the ultimate revenge, a life filled with purpose, dignity, and love. To anyone listening to this story, remember, being discarded does not determine your value. Your true worth is revealed by what you can nurture, create, and achieve when no one else is watching. Don't let fear or pride stop you from reclaiming your life. Opportunities exist everywhere for those willing to see potential where others see waste. And sometimes the best revenge is not confrontation, but simply flourishing in a way that leaves no doubt about your strength, resilience, and brilliance. Thank you for listening to my story. If it inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of triumph and resilience. Leave a comment below sharing your own experiences or how you've overcome adversity. Your story deserves to be heard. Remember, every setback is just a setup for your comeback.